Welcome back to the second and final episode in this title, Spurious Coercive Control Allegations in the Family Court, How to Strike Back. We have much to get through, which means that I am not going to do a recap on episode 1. Episode 1 is available and accessible to you right now. So if you have not yet seen it, please do. You may also like to familiarise yourself with the prelude to this title. Spurious Coercive Control Allegations in the Family Court. Is it time to fight back? That video provides important context to the lunacy that has flooded into the family courts, where hate, acrimony, revenge, hurt feelings and irrational emotions with the intent to minimise, reduce and deny contact are dominating the agendas. And from what I am seeing, the court simply can't cope with it, and the leadership is failing to get any grip on the problem. All the time this goes on, the lives of children are being destroyed, and any potential to build long-term positive relationships between parents is being totally decimated. In my opinion, the family court has degenerated into an inept, incompetent and incomprehensible farce. Parents, particularly non-resident parents, should not have to stand by and simply take it anymore. I repeat the two caveats that I explained in the first episode. Firstly, I am not talking about the real victims of abhorrent domestic abuse and coercive control, where any parent or child needs appropriate and often serious safeguarding considerations. I am talking about the spiteful hate, the dredging up within a relationship of every trivial, unfortunate incident, the demonising of a person's character, the assassination of an individual's parenting ability, where if you throw enough mud, perhaps some of it will stick. And let's not forget the dark forces regularly seen to be promoting and encouraging these motivations and practices. The family lawyers, who all too often stir the pot of acrimony and hate for financial gain, with absolutely no professional duty of care to any child. The fact that they are allowed to set foot inside any court case involving children is a total shameful blight on the system. So stop hiring them. Empower yourself as a litigant person with a trusted Mckenzie friend from my network to stop the harm to your children. Secondly, I am not telling you what to do or how to manage your own case. I don't know your case. I am presenting to you a fictional scenario with fictional characters. If you want to talk to me about your own case, it's very easy. Just go to www.contactphil.co.uk and book a free chat. So let's continue with the journey of Mr. Groves. Remember, he attended the first hearing dispute resolution appointment and has directions to respond in full to the allegations made by Abigail Groves. He can also raise his own Scott schedule of allegations, and the matter is now off to a fact-finding case management hearing with a district judge to determine whether a fact-finding may be needed or not based on relevance, necessity and proportionality. But before I do, I simply must run my excellent introduction. I am Philip Kedge, a retired Police Chief Inspector and Director of the Mckenzie Friend UK Network. With the growing national network of independent Mckenzie Friends, we are helping thousands of litigants in person, just like you, through the family courts at the fraction of the cost of totally unnecessary family lawyers who all too often stir the pot of acrimony for financial gain and engage in thousands of pounds of totally unnecessary work, leaving people financially crippled and in debt for years. It's time to kick them out of the family courts altogether. To help me spread the word, all I ask you to do is to please like, share, subscribe and to hit that notification bell. So what does spurious allegations of coercive control and hate look like? Well, the ones you may very well be experiencing yourself. But to put that into context, please watch my blog, Coercive Control, the new family court mass weapon of hate, 10 spurious examples. On seeing that, the bits of the jigsaw will quickly start to fall into place, and I have no doubt it will resonate with many of you. If it does, again, please don't hesitate to contact me. With the fact-finding case management hearing listed in 6 weeks' time, the first conversation I have with Mr. Groves as his Mckenzie friend is to explore our understanding around exactly what that hearing is about. So many people enter into the hearings with little understanding of their purpose and as such may be woefully prepared or simply not on the same page. Planning and preparation at every phase is absolutely key, which often means slowing things down and going back to basics, keeping it simple and doing those simple things well. As I always say, engage brain, never emotions. When considering whether a fact-finding hearing should be held or not, the court must, with reference to Practice Directions 12J, consider 3 factors, that of relevance, necessity and proportionality. Together, these then lead to the central question: what is the purpose of holding any fact-finding hearing? If there is no clear purpose, it should be struck out. You need to sear those 3 factors into your mind: relevance, necessity and proportionality. Why is that so important? Because from what I am observing time and time again, the court is simply rubber stamping fact findings at the first hearing dispute resolution appointment. All too often these first hearings are entirely unfit for purpose to properly scrutinise coercive control and abuse. It goes a bit like this. Oh, a 20-page statement of mudslinging hate. Oh, we have to have a fact finding. So you are saying that your ex was abusive and coercively controlling? Oh, we must hold a fact finding, and don't worry, there's no chance of them having any contact with the children for perhaps the next 6 months. Our job is to ensure that the child's safety is paramount. So Mr. Groves, who has not seen his children for 3 months, is looking at 6 weeks until his fact-finding case management meeting. Potentially another 3 months until any actual fact-finding hearing. And then another 3 months for Cafcass to do a Section 7 report based on any findings. I mean, honestly, a person could potentially be criminally convicted for child abuse, serve their prison sentence and get released before Mr. Groves sees his children again. There are parents out there on local authority public protection plans for significant harm to their kids who attend core group meetings, update their action plans and go home to their kids. But Mr. Groves, a husband for 14 years, with the ups and downs of marriage that all of us living in the real world understand. A loving, devoted father of 12-year-old Daniel and their 4-year-old daughter Sandy is being treated as a monster. He applied to the court in good faith, a court that he believed would support the children's right to see him, to have a relationship with him and to protect that relationship, to secure that loving bond, only to find that his relationship with the children is now being systematically destroyed. He never ever expected this cruelty, this punishment, this torture in 1,000,000 years. So let's take a stand and return to those 3 essential factors to plan our defence and attack: relevance, necessity and proportionality, to challenge the purpose of a fact-finding hearing and to hold the court to account in its application of Practice Directions 12J. Let's start off by looking at relevance. In order to do that, we need to understand the definitions of coercive behaviour and controlling behaviour. Coercive behaviour is an act or pattern of acts of assaults, threats, humiliation and intimidation or other abuse that is used to harm, punish or frighten the victim. So I would help Mr. Groves to scrutinise Abigail's statement to see exactly what her claims are, particularly that of patterns of behaviour, and to look at where any further evidence exists that suggests that the behaviour was being used to harm, punish or frighten her. This infers some form of knowledge and intent. With spurious mudslinging allegations, there is often what I call mostly background noise, with very little substance or concrete allegations. So let's look next at the definition of controlling behaviour. Controlling behaviour is a range of acts designed to make a person subordinate and or dependent by isolating them from sources of support, exploiting their resources and capacities for personal gain, depriving them of the means needed for their independence, resistance and escape, and regulating their everyday activity. So we are looking to show that the allegations and any supposed evidence within Abigail's statement simply doesn't fit in with the serious nature of the behaviours as outlined in the definition. And let me make that point clearer. I have in front of me examples of coercive control published by the Crown Prosecution Service. Let me read a few of them. Taking control over aspects of their everyday life, such as where they can go, who they can see, what to wear, and when they can sleep. Depriving them access to support services such as specialist support or medical services. Enforcing rules and activity which humiliate, degrade and dehumanise the victim. Forcing the victim to take part in criminal activity such as shoplifting, neglect or abuse of children to encourage self-blame and prevent disclosure to authorities. Threats to reveal or publish private information, for example, threatening to out someone. When you look at a statement of spurious allegations of mudslinging hate, it won't contain the serious behaviours of real coercive control as suggested by the CPS. Instead, what the resident parent invariably tries to do is to weaponise the children and the court against their ex by dredging up common albeit unfortunate marital or relationship incidents, and then exaggerates, inflates and misrepresents them in the hope that if you throw enough mud, some may stick, which will then minimise, reduce or prevent child contact with their ex. And let's get straight to the point. Marriage and long-term relationships are themselves coercively controlling by their very nature. You can't do what you want, when you want to, and how you want to. If you want that kind of lifestyle, stay single and don't have children. And what is happening now is that the courts are so blinkered that they are not even trying to distinguish or understand the differences between the very serious issues of abuse and coercive control against general realities of relationships and the understandable common imperfections within them. In short, common sense has left every family court building, and their approach is nothing short of total insanity. Let's now turn our attention to the factor of necessity. Why is a fact-finding necessary? What exactly is it seeking to achieve? What are the likely outcomes in any event? And yes, I may have engaged in some inappropriate parenting, and over 14 years of marriage, some of my behaviours may have been a little regrettable. Who can say that they haven't? What's the point? These are not the serious issues of significant domestic abuse that the family court should be dealing with. The other common argument around necessity is when the non-resident parent actually already has unsupervised contact, or they had unsupervised contact until it was dramatically stopped by their hateful ex. I'm already parenting. What's the point of dragging this through the courts for months and months? Let's just crack on with child arrangements and a final order. Let's get back to those two words which are absent from the family court: common sense. The third factor is that of proportionality. This can often be in relation to what is known as the avoidance of delay principle. In any proceedings in which any question with respect to the upbringing of a child arises, the court must have regard to the general principle that any delay in determining the question is likely to prejudice the welfare of the child. How is it proportionate to Mr. Groves' case and thousands of you in a similar position to delay child contact, often for several months, with the lifelong harm that is being caused to children and their development? How is facilitating and encouraging two parents to destroy each other in the best interests of anything? What part of this totally moronic, perverse and idiotic situation does the family court not understand? So folks, this is the battleground, and as litigants in person, I feel strongly that people need to start taking a stand to hold magistrates and judges firmly to account. As litigants in person, we need to start uniting with purpose in doing so. The alternative is the continual destruction of lives through the broken, inept and dysfunctional family court system. Enough is enough. So to action. We know that the first task for Mr. Groves is to respond to Abigail's 20-page statement of hate, and what we're going to do is to dismantle it, to show it for what it really is. With my guidance, Matthew firstly identifies and removes from Abigail's statement all the vague assertions, the feelings and expressions of emotions, the inflated and exaggerated cut and paste sentences. You know the ones like, "I was treading on eggshells. I was fearful that I would provoke a reaction. I felt belittled and isolated." All the non-provable assertions of feelings that don't reflect any evidence in relation to behaviour. Once that is done, it's always very interesting to see what's left, and usually it's not a lot. After removing all the background noise from Abigail's statement, Matthew is left with only a handful of allegations to address that refer to specific incidents over the 14-year relationship. He needs to now appropriately manage and challenge them, and there are generally three approaches to doing so. Firstly, that he accepts an allegation as being accurate and a fair reflection of an incident, but challenges it as being of no significant relevance. For example, 14 years ago, 2 weeks before we got married, we had an argument. Mr. Grove shouted at me, leaving me feeling scared and fearful. So, removing the assertion of fear and being scared, what you have is 14 years ago, 2 weeks before we got married, we had an argument. He shouted at me. So the argument is 14 years old. How does that justify Mr. Grove not seeing their 4-year-old daughter and 12-year-old son? What does shouting mean anyway? That's very subjective. What was the reason for him shouting? Could it have been unfortunate, but in real world terms understandable? How does this supposedly fit into a pattern of behaviour where they got married, had 2 beautiful children, and many, many wonderful times before, sadly, as nearly 50% of marriages do, it went wrong and they parted company? When marriages or relationships go south, sometimes with a slow decline, there are always tensions, pressures and regrettable issues. You show me a marriage and a decline of a marriage, that doesn't. I'm not condoning it. I've just got both my feet planted firmly on planet Earth. Unlike so many in the family courts, who seem to have their feet planted on planet stupid. Secondly, there may be an allegation where Mr. Groves accepts that an event occurred, but argues that it has been distorted and totally misrepresented. Well, in that case, Mr. Groves needs to explain his account and put it in the right context according to him. With these type of allegations, without any independent evidence or witnesses, the truth often lies nowhere, and I really don't like these he said, she said contested allegations, because when determined on balance of probability, they can often be no more than just a coin flip. The courts often refer to this as litigation not based on evidence but on witness credibility. In other words, who the court believes. I personally feel that this is very dangerous territory for the non-resident parent for 2 reasons. Firstly, it is more likely to become a trial of emotions and subjective feelings and opinions. Who looks as if they are telling the truth? Who is showing the emotions that suggest that they are telling the truth? This is no way to conduct a trial that potentially has significant and far-reaching implications for child contact. I have no doubt that so many non-resident parents fall foul of this because they hide their emotions. They tend to play with a straighter bat, whilst all the blubbering and game playing from the other side wins the day. Secondly, if the welfare of the child is the paramount consideration, the judges, and most certainly magistrates, are extremely risk adverse. It is always by default the safer and easier option to find in favour of the resident parent making the allegations. They don't want to be at the end of another baby P type scenario. Judges don't want to put their jobs at risk. They've got their sights on that judge's promotional ladder. One day I want to be a circuit judge so that I can be called Your Honour. Never mind the family destruction that I leave in my rearview mirror as I drive forward on my promotional path. The third kind of allegation is where Mr. Groves entirely refutes it as false and made up, in which case it's down to any evidence and balance of probability. What I like more about these types of allegations is that if you can actually prove that the allegation is false, exaggerated, or motivated by hate, then that is your golden ticket. So Abigail's statement is being dismantled and Mr. Groves is focused on responding to the 3 types of allegations. I then suggest to Mr. Groves another trick. I ask him to go through the statement and identify all the times a phrase is repeated. I can guarantee that there will be repeated cut and paste sentences. These are often associated with exaggerated claims that are not proportionate to the behaviour mentioned. For example, on page 3, it may state, "He looked at me menacingly. This caused me extreme fear. I spent the rest of the day treading on eggshells." On page 7, it may state, "He slammed the door. This caused me extreme fear. I spent the rest of the day treading on eggshells." On page 17, "I returned home late and was in extreme fear of being criticised. I had to tread on eggshells." The litigation approach here is almost like the more I say it, the more it must be true, and the more my truth has to be believed. So where there is repetition, it needs challenging, because it's not evidence, it's litigation by sound bites. Litigation by sound bites is not justice. It's not a fair trial. Matthew also points out that Abigail has exhibited a small number of texts as evidence. These are spread over the course of the 14-year relationship. They were sent by Matthew and do contain some unfortunate content. You know, where you've had an argument, perhaps been drinking too much, and then text something in frustration. I'm not condoning it, but again, I do acknowledge that these things can happen. So I advise Mr. Groves that one of the things he can do in his response is to apologise, to take the wind out of Abigail's sails, show some remorse, state, "I'm sorry if 5 years ago I sent a text that was hurtful," even though he may privately be thinking, "But we did after that go on to have our second child, so what's the big deal?" But of course, he may think it, but just don't say it. You see, issues raised like this are when I explain to a client that they may need to fall not on their sword, but instead, metaphorically, on a small knife. You don't want to critically wound yourself, but on the other hand, by admitting to a somewhat historical and minimal event, it removes the necessity on that matter being heard at a fact-finding. Showing contrition and remorse always goes down well. "I've been a bad man and regret it." You can just picture Cafcass salivating at the prospect. "We've got them to see their wrongdoings. Aren't we marvellous? The system works perfectly. Let's not change it." And don't forget, Mr. Groves still has in his back pocket undisclosed texts from Abigail calling him a twat, dickhead, low-life scum and piece of shit. It'll be interesting to see if she is willing to apologise for those, or does she believe that she is above any criticism or wrongdoing? Probably. That's what usually happens. My behaviour was justified because I was the victim and I was protecting the children. Now, a further potential tactic by Mr. Groves in response to the small handful of evidence that Abigail claims to prove coercive control throughout the relationship is for Mr. Groves to potentially pull together hundreds of texts where Abigail affirms her love for him, that he is the best father and husband in the whole wide world, and he is the most amazing man in the entire universe. Mr. Groves can also find texts where he supported her, ran around when she was unwell, showed care and loving kindness, where he was there for her, was concerned about her welfare and well-being. All the holiday snaps and videos over the years showing fun, laughter and a loving family life. And indeed, perhaps hundreds of other information sources that reflects all the times they were nothing more than going through mundane family life on a day-to-day basis. Where exactly is the coercive control hiding in all of that? So Mr. Groves starts bundling together in large lever arch files all the communications that exists throughout the 14 years of marriage that his electronic devices allow him to retrieve. Now, the court only allows court bundles of up to 350 pages, so Mr. Groves is going to have to seek permission to submit all this information as his counter evidence to Abigail's claims that she was coercively controlled throughout the marriage. The judge will have a heart attack, but surely Mr. Groves has a right to defend himself, where the conversations with Abigail via text, email and social media must be the best evidence available to do that. Now, if the court denies Mr. Groves permission to submit hundreds of pages of texts, Facebook messages and emails, then he needs to ask the court to determine an appropriate number of pages of evidence that the court considers is reasonable, that will fairly allow him to demonstrate that there was no coercive control throughout the marriage. And that includes with all its ups and downs that anyone may consider as being normal. So Mr. Groves is putting that back onto the court. He wants to know. And how do they determine what may be reasonable without seeing all the evidence anyway? So, Mr. Groves has now completed his statement of response, hopefully exposing Abigail's statement for what it is, a load of bollocks, and also his own Scott schedule of allegations. Along with these, he is also going to submit a new C2 requesting for multiple directions to be considered at the forthcoming hearing. Remember, this is the hearing that determines whether a fact-finding will be considered or not, and Mr. Groves wants to apply as much justified pressure on the court as possible, not to go down that destructive path. These are the points he wishes to raise for directions. Firstly, Mr. Groves requests that the court, when applying Practice Directions 12J, gives a detailed explanation to any judgment that is made. That as a litigant in person, he would like a full explanation of any decision based on the 3 factors of relevance, necessity and proportionality. If the judge decides to proceed to a fact-finding, it is only fair to understand in very clear terms why. Mr. Groves is not going to simply stand by and watch as the court just rubber stamps a fact-finding hearing. Secondly, if there is to be a fact-finding, Mr. Groves wishes to seek further permission to file witness statements based on his Scott schedule. As the determination of coercive control is a pattern of behaviour, he also wishes to submit character and witness statements from friends, relatives, work colleagues, all testifying to what a devoted, loving father he is and how he has always supported Abigail during the marriage. Not one person has ever raised a concern. Mr. Groves was concerned at the number of times Abigail in her statement referred to expressions of extreme frustration, extreme fear, extreme anxiety, extreme tensions, extreme worries, extreme concerns, alongside countless emotional expressions of hurt feelings and victimhood. His concern is that these expressions are entirely disproportionate to the reality and to the allegations being made. This therefore potentially raises concerns in relation to Abigail's mental health. Where does all this overwhelming extremeness actually come from? Perhaps Abigail is overly sensitive and naturally anxious. Perhaps there needs to be a professional assessment. Perhaps her extreme anxieties are actually a safeguarding issue that may be creating an atmosphere in her house where the children are having on a daily basis to tread on eggshells. That may be child abuse. If such extreme reactions are not normal, then surely that is an issue for the court. Mr. Groves therefore raises the issue as to whether or not there may need to be a psychiatric assessment of Abigail. Next, Mr. Groves also wants to seek directions for interim contact arrangements. He has not seen their children for months, and there could be many more months before a fact-finding hearing. What exactly are the risks of harm? What risk does he pose to the children? Mr. Groves wants a specific hearing to be listed for interim contact pending any fact-finding proceedings. Now, Mr. Groves has had permission to file his own Scott schedule, which he has done. However, in the event that a fact-finding is to go ahead, he reminds the court in the C2 that he will want to file and serve his own evidential statement of allegations against Abigail. Abigail Groves will also need the opportunity to file her statement of response. As you can see, this whole process is really starting to get disproportionately out of hand, which is of course the tactic to show that it is disproportionate, ridiculous, and serves no real purpose. We want this well-considered C2 application from Mr. Groves to leave any sensible, rational and pragmatically minded person to ask, where on planet Earth is this all heading? And has the UK family court system totally lost the plot? Which of course it has. For example, if the court is to make findings that Mr. Groves called Abigail a lazy bitch in the presence of the children, and Abigail called him a fucking twat, also in the presence of the children, both are now domestic abusers and child abusers. No doubt like 90% of parents who live in the real world. So what is the court going to do? Send them both on a domestic abuse perpetrators program? Oh, but you can't, because there aren't any domestic abuse perpetrators programs for women, because it isn't cost effective to run them. So what is the court now going to do to be fair and impartial? How is a fact-finding on all this load of bollocks going to help both parties to move on in the best interests of the children? If a fact-finding is determined, just consider the resources the family court would then need to dedicate to it and the time it would all take. The full fact-finding hearing to be listed for anywhere between 2 and 5 days for evidence. Cafcass to then do a Section 7 report taking 3 months to complete. A dispute resolution appointment to consider Cafcass recommendations and any interim contact. Potentially a further dispute resolution appointment to monitor progress. Perhaps there may be continued resistance to contact by Abigail resulting in breach applications. Until one day you may eventually get to arrive at a final hearing, by which time lives and childhoods have been destroyed. And all for what? The hurt feelings of a self-pitying, vindictive, spiteful resident parent who has been allowed to weaponise the entire family court process against their ex. So let's see what happens as Mr. Groves attends the next hearing, the fact-finding case management hearing. At the hearing, the judge confirms that he or she has read all the statements, the Scott schedule and Mr. Groves C2. Over the next hour, the judge asks meaningful and direct questions of both parties. The judge probes some of the examples of the allegations. The judge examines the evidence and is clearly testing the water in relation to what might happen at a fact-finding hearing. It is in itself like a mini fact-finding hearing, an exploration and assessment of the allegations, getting a sense of both the parties, seeing past the hate and acrimony, applying common sense, sensible risk management, and the consideration of relevance, necessity, and proportionality. This judge seems to be on the ball, but at one point turns to Mr. Groves and says that his allegations seem to be tit-for-tat allegations. Exactly, and I have prepared Mr. Groves on how to respond if such a thing was said. Mr. Groves replies, "Well, Judge, if you consider my allegations as being tit for tat, then what you are saying is that mine is the tit and hers is the tat, and that both sets of allegations are a nonsense, in which case they should either both be heard as nonsense or both be thrown out as nonsense. My suggestion is the latter." Genius! You can see the cogs of the judge's thoughts turning on that one. After a total of 1.5 hours of exploring all the information, the judge comes to a decision and concludes that the 12J test has not been met, and hands down a full and detailed explanation of that decision. In summary, the judge takes some of the allegations as examples and applies the factors of relevance, necessity, and proportionality. The judge even concludes that the court may very well find that some, or indeed many, of the allegations may be found as being domestic abuse on applying the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021, but explains that the court is not and should not be about conducting a witch hunt on every aspect of inappropriate behaviour that may be determined as abuse within a relationship. The judge continues by saying that conducting such a witch hunt would be more harmful to the children and indeed to both parties than any benefits. The judge goes as far to say that this is not what the family court system is about and must not be turned into, particularly when it is absolutely clear to any reasonably minded person that the process, the ongoing acrimony between the parents and the delay in contact would be more harmful to the welfare of the children than any purposeful or meaningful outcome from a fact-finding hearing. In that judgment, the judge simply sweeps away the hate and then warns both parents as to the harm that they are causing their children. Mr. Groves also gets both barrels, but that's fine. This is the outcome he wanted. He had always tried to take and offer the path of light, not hate. He had no choice but to fight back. The judge concludes by stating that appropriate interim contact should now urgently be considered. The judge keeps ownership of the case and books an urgent directions hearing for submissions on interim contact within the next 2 weeks and requests both parties to submit statements on how contact should now be progressed towards a sensible resolution. And that's it. All that acrimony, hurt feelings, irrational emotions, family lawyer-fueled hate for financial gain, rejected, dismissed, thrown out, simply gone. Brilliant. Mr. Groves simply can't believe it. He is going to see their children again. He breaks down and is in tears. The stress of what he has been put through has almost been too much for him. As I explained at the beginning, that this is a fictional scenario with fictional characters. However, let me for a few seconds provide you with a sense of real-life optimism. I am aware of a case where the non-resident parent, when faced with a statement of over 20 pages of hate and spurious allegations, refused to simply be put to the sword and made it clear that they would fight back with everything they had. The judge reviewed the entire case, saw the light, and threw it all out. The non-resident parent explained that in those few seconds all the drama vanished. The nightmare journey of hell was brought to an end. It was as if a magic wand of common sense had been waved. But questions still remain. Why is there a lack of proper scrutiny of the allegations and any evidence at the very first hearing? Why is it that at the slightest mention of abuse or coercive control, Cafcass appear to be taking a completely risk-averse position of immediately recommending the consideration of fact-finding hearings, pushing the parents down the destructive path of all-out conflict rather than considering a more sensible and balanced solutions-based approach? In the fictional scenario, where would Mr. Groves be today if he hadn't have taken a stand? I dread to think. Please, however, remember, I am not telling you how to conduct your case. I don't know your case. I am sharing my own thoughts and ideas. If you want to contact me in relation to your own case, please go to www.contactphil.co.uk. I end with my thoughts about relationships in the real world. Arguing, rowing, falling out, upsetting and even offending each other in a relationship is normal, understandable and even healthy. Every credible family therapist appears to tell you that. Just Google it. To consider the normal ups and downs within family life under the family court lens of zero tolerance to all inappropriate behaviour is madness. It is simply an impossibility as human beings to spend our relationships every day in controlled, safe spaces. If we did, we would probably very quickly become dysfunctional and psychotic. Look, I'm not minimising or condoning domestic abuse. I'm simply stating that unfortunate family matters need to be considered with common sense, relevance and proportionality, and the necessity of engaging in fact findings to be fully questioned. From what I am witnessing, that simply is not happening. Every day that the family court continues to wield its blunt sword of mad justice, it is causing unforgivable harm to both parents and the little people it claims to be protecting, the children. I see it, you are no doubt experiencing it, that is why you are watching this blog. But the incompetence at the top of the judiciary is failing to recognise the harm being caused. They are probably just thinking, thank you for my knighthood. We are where we are. It is what it is. While the public, as family court service users, shouldn't have to take it anymore. It's time to unite. It's time to take a stand. Thanks for listening.